Hello and welcome to the third and final of your extemporaneous preparation labs. This once again is the online offering where I'm going to take you through the practical parts of the lab for those of you that couldn't attend to use in the lab, and also for those of you just wanting to refresh your memory on what we did in the lab. I'm going to go ahead and assume that you have done all of the pre-work in the lab book, and I will just get straight on with doing the practical side and just change the camera angle now. Here you can see I've got everything set up and ready to go for us to make our cream. Now I've previously weighed everything out because by this point hopefully you're happy with how to use a balance accurately, and we don't need to waste time with you seeing me doing that. So I'm just going to go through the method and the instructions that I've got written down in the lab book now with you so you can follow along. The first point says complete all the sections of the product worksheet, so hopefully you've already done that. And then prepare a suitable label. Again, hopefully you've already done that, or that has been done for you. Then we've said, using the master formula, calculate the quantity of ingredients required to produce the final weight needed. So I've already done that, but the master formula that you've been given has given you to 100 grams, and we need to make 25 grams. But remember that we need to make an excess because we won't be able to scrape every last bit of cream off where we're making it. So we're going to put a 5 gram excess in. So we're going to be working out how much we need for 30 grams. So you can either do that with a calculator, or you can divide by 10 from the master formula and then times by 3, which will get you to the 30 grams needed. I've actually weighed out twice the amount that I need for that, so I've weighed out enough for 60 grams, and that's because at the end I'm going to show you how to put this into two different sorts of containers. So the next step is to weigh the tube or pot, including the lid, and to record its mass. So I've not done that yet, so I'll just go and do that now. And it weighs 52.3 grams. So I'll just make a note of that on my worksheet. So we need to know that so that when we come to the end and we're putting the cream into the pot, we know exactly how much cream we've got in there, and we can work out the difference in mass, which will tell us how much cream there is. After that, we then need to essentially weigh out or measure out all of the ingredients. So we've got the acetostearyl alcohol, the liquid paraffin, the distilled water, although we don't know exactly how much of that we're going to use because we're going up to 30 grams, the cetramide, the chlorhexidine. So then the first step is to melt the acetostearyl alcohol in an evaporating dish over a water bath, and ensuring the temperature goes no higher than 60 degrees centigrade, and then to add the liquid paraffin to the molten acetostearyl alcohol and remove it from the heat. So the first thing I'm going to do is to take the lid off the water bath on one pot, and then use the tongs to take the extra rings off, because remember they'll be hot, and that's ready for the acetostearyl alcohol, which I've previously weighed, to go into an evaporating dish and to go straight on there. Then that needs to melt, and then once that's melted we'll put the liquid paraffin in. So I'm going to slightly jump ahead, and I'm going to put some water into a beaker, and I'm also going to get that heating up as well on the back. If you want to wait and watch the acetostearyl alcohol melting, then you can definitely do that. And it's already starting to become liquid. The solid mass is moving around inside of there. And once that's melted, we'll then put the liquid paraffin back in. So that's nearly all melted now. I'm just going to get my liquid paraffin. Now, again, as I said before, I've got double the amount that you're going to be using in here, so this weighing boat is quite full, but you won't have half as much of this in there, so I'm making twice the amount. Now as you put that in, because your liquid paraffin is cold, you might find that you get some solidification of the acetostearyl alcohol, and that's why we're going to need to leave that on there for a little bit longer, just to make sure everything gets back up to temperature. Now at this stage, now the water's getting nice and warm, we can also add in the cetramide to the water and then the chlorhexidine. So there isn't that very much cetramide or chlorhexidine. So when it says to add gradually, you probably won't be able to add it in more than a couple of goes. But I'm just going to put about half of that in there. Cetramide. And I'm going to give it a stir with the glass rod. That might be quite hot, so I'm just going to use the tongs to hold it. Now the reason we're putting the cetramide in the water and the paraffin and the cetosterol alcohol together separately is because of their different solubilities. So the liquid paraffin and the cetosterol alcohol are both oil-based, and so they're similar to each other and will dissolve in each other. And the cetramide and the chlorhexidine are both quite polar molecules on one end, at least, and so they go more easily into the water. So we want to get those into solution nicely. Just going to add the rest of the cetramide. So I'm just going to add the chlorhexidine. And you can work out the exact amount of water that you need to put in simply by adding up the masses of all of the other ingredients and then taking that away from the final volume. As you're mixing this, you might notice that you start getting some bubbles on the top. And as you know, when you use a surfactant, you also get bubbles on the top. So maybe have a think about some of the molecules that are going in here and how we're actually managing to mix the water and the oil phases together. So I'm happy that both of these phases are now ready to go. And then we need to start mixing them together. So we need to ensure that the temperature of both the oily and the aqueous phase is around 60 degrees centigrade. So you might want to check that with a thermometer at this stage. I'm happy with the temperature of this water bath and how long they've been on there, that they're going to be at about the right temperatures for me to mix them, although I wouldn't want to leave them on there for much longer. So I need to gradually add the two phases together by transferring the oily phase into the aqueous phase in small parts and gently stir until it is cooled. So I'm going to take my aqueous phase off, and I'm pretty confident I'll be able to hold the evaporating dish. I will. And whilst I'm already stirring, I'm going to start adding that in there. Now, I've just added a very small amount of the oil phase into the water, and already we can see we have got a very white, milky looking liquid, which suggests, as I'm sure you know, that we have an emulsion. From first year labs, you should remember that. And given that we're adding the oil to the water and we're making a cream, have a think about whether that is going to be a water and oil or an oil and water emulsion. So now we've got all of those mixed together and we've got a nice homogeneous or homogeneous liquid, however you like to think. That is still quite warm, which is why it's still as liquid as it is. That's going to get cooler and cooler, and as it cools down, those more solid waxes that we had at the beginning and those more liquid waxes that we had at the beginning are going to come to some sort of equilibrium, and we're going to get left with a semi-solid cream-like formulation. So we've waited about 10 or 15 minutes, and the cream has now got to room temperature and is no longer a liquid, but a semi-solid. You can see that that is going nicely on our stirring rod, and it looks a nice creamy, white, smooth consistency. So we need to get that into either a little pot cream, or a tube, which you would have no doubt seen and used before. That's why I've made double the amount, so I'm going to do both. Now, before, if you remember, we weighed this pot at the beginning to see how much its mass was. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to fill it about 3/4 of the way full, then put the lid back on, and then weigh it on the balance and see how much you've got, and put in as much as you need up to the amount prescribed, so 25 grams in this case. And when we put it in, we're going to use a spatula or a palette knife, whichever one you want to call it. So I'm just going to clean off the stirring rod, put that down onto a bit of paper towel so I don't make the desk too messy, and then take a small amount, and then we're going to put that into the bottom and the side first. I'm going to do that all the way around to begin with, and by doing that we're going to ensure that we have cream all the way around the sides and on the bottom, so that we get a more elegant looking product at the end. And scrape off any that you get on the sides, and then push it down into the bottom of the pot. And then I like to just pull my knife around while turning the pot so that I get a relatively even top on it in the pot, and that we filled all the way around the side. Okay, now you would then go and weigh that and make sure that you have got the right amount in there. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that I have. One thing you'll want to do as well is take a circle of greaseproof paper and pop that in the lid. So that'll stop any of the cream going into the lid, and you don't know what's been in that lid before perhaps as well. You might also, just to finish it off nicely, want to take a bit of paper towel and just before we put the lid on, clean around the rim, then put the lid on, and then with another fresh bit of paper towel just clean up the sides for any that we've got around there. Alright, and then you'll get left with a nice clear, elegant looking pot of cream, of antiseptic cream in this case. So that's one way of doing it and putting it into a pot, probably the easiest way. The other thing that we might want to do is we might want to make one of these tubes. So this one's empty, but you can see that they're sealed on the top, and when you use them, you use the back of the lid to pierce that so you can get your cream out. So there's no real way of getting our cream into there, except that one is the finished version of this. So these come with their backs open like that, and then we need to get our cream down into there, which, as you can imagine, with a palette knife and a semi-solid mixture, can be a bit of a challenge. So one good way of getting it in is to use some greaseproof paper, then make a row of our cream, roll the greaseproof paper up, then insert the greaseproof paper into here, and then squeeze it out into the tube. And that's what I'm going to do now. And again, you would then have to make sure you've got the right amount in here. So you might need to then just top it up with a little bit more using the palette knife after you finish doing this. So let's get a nice, roughly even slug of that in there. And then we need to roll it up so that it's able get inside of that tube and then just squeeze it out. So hopefully that will go in. There we go. So I can get that right down to the bottom now, and then just pinch at the end there and pull out the greaseproof paper. Like so. And I probably put a little bit too much in there because I've got some of that on my hand. So you could just change your gloves or something. I'm just going to wipe that off. And I've got a bit on the desk as well. So you can then just shake that down into the bottom. This isn't completely full, and so you might want to put a little bit more in, but it can be a bit messy putting the cream in this way. So if you want to put a bit more in, you can do so with the palette knife. But as I said, this is maybe a slightly more messy way. Sorry, I'm out of the camera there. This is maybe a slightly messier way and more wasteful way of getting the cream in the tube. But we have that filled now, so you've got the squeezing out through the greaseproof paper method, and we've also got the way where you can just use the palette knife to just scoop it in the back. Obviously, industrially, you would just have some sort of nozzle that would fire it in there. And then we also need to seal the end. So I would call that crimping the end. And on bench scale, we're just going to use these crimpers to do so. So if you look at these, we've got essentially like a plier, and then on one side we've got two grooves. So once we squeeze the end of this together, we can put the flat end in there and turn so we get the little flap at the back of the tube the right depth. So first things first, make sure you've cleaned the edge of your tube and just get it started so it's flat, and then give it a nice good firm squeeze so that it's sealed at the end, like so. Well, I haven't got that very straight, so let's straighten that up. There we go. Of course, if we start squeezing that, it's just going to come straight back out the other end. So we're going to fold it over a couple of times, and I'm going to put that into there and then turn to give me an even turn to seal the crimpers. And then we're going to do one more again in the same direction. Get that over and then seal that again, folding down the crimpers. And so you get a nice even back to the tube. Maybe I've done that slightly wonky, it could have been slightly better. And you can see that we've got a very full tube of cream here now. And that's it. You've got a cream in a tube and a cream in a pot. You then put your labels on it, put it in a box, and then hand it out with the appropriate counselling. The cream we have just made was produced by using a fusion method, where we heated up bases, melted them, mixed them together, and put the dry ingredients in there as well. I've already explained at the very beginning that trituration, one of the other methods, is essentially by grinding dry ingredients together in a pestle and mortar, and is something that you should already be comfortable with. But the last method, levigation, is something that you may well not have done before. So I thought I'd take this opportunity on the recording, at least, to show you what we mean by levigation. So in your packs, we've explained that that's when an insoluble powder is reduced in size and incorporated into a base whilst wet. Now this is achieved in the lab by rubbing the powder in a small amount of the base, so that's why it's wet, and we do that using a palette knife on a slab. And this is until the grain size is reduced sufficiently that it's not feeling grainy and not showing to be grainy, and also that the powder is fully incorporated into the base. Only a small amount of base is used initially to make a paste, and this is a common theme in lots of things that we make. We might make an admixture or a paste to begin with so that we can get that grain size down and we can get rid of any lumps. And then we dilute it further to the final concentration needed. I thought I'd show you this technique because it is one that is still relatively widely used to get to specific strengths of creams or to put some rather different ingredients into common cream bases. So we're going to use aqueous cream, and I'm just going to use some calamine as well, just to show you a very common cream that you might come across and how that's made using a levigation method. So to do this, we take all of our dry insoluble powder and put that into the middle of a clean slab. And then we take a small amount of the base that we're going to use and then slowly start to mix them in with each other. Now this powder might be quite light and easily blow away until we get it into that wet mixture. So until we've got that initial paste, we need to be quite slow and careful about how we incorporate the powder into the small amount of base that we've got on the slab. So you can think of this very much like mixing together into some butter, and then once we've got all of the dry powder at least slightly incorporated into the base, we then need to start getting the grain size down with a shear force as we move the palette knife across the slab, much like spreading very hard butter onto a piece of toast. Now, you can do this with one palette knife if you're comfortable, but you'll find that you then get bits on the back of the palette knife that you need to get off. So you'll certainly want a second palette knife to clean the first palette knife as a minimum. Or if you've got a larger amount of cream and you've got a big enough slab and you want to do this job quicker, you can start doing a 2 palette knife technique. Now, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's absolutely fine. It might just take slightly longer for you to get to the desired result. Now what we need to do here is we need to make sure that the grain size goes down sufficiently small that we can't see any traces of dragging in the cream. And I'll just show you what I mean by that. I've just pulled my cream out along the slab with the palette knife to see if I get any trails in it. And hopefully you can see just at the end there where that little dot is there. Okay, that's the beginning of a trail running through my cream. So it's not quite ready yet. So we need to keep going with our shearing motion. Now you don't have to put that much force into this. It's more about getting the flat of the palette knife nicely onto the tile, and then you can mix that in together. So you can use this method for putting soluble creams in as well. If you're just going to be putting it into a cold base and you want to get it in quickly, you can also use this method for mixing 2 creams together as well if you needed to. But its primary purpose is for getting insoluble solids into a base. So just gathering up from the palette, from the tile with the palette knife into the middle, so I can see how I'm getting on. Right, that's really nice. So hopefully you can see there that I've got quite a nice smooth paste going on. And we can see that it's turned pink because of the calamine in there. And then we need to add in the rest of the base to whatever concentration is required. Now I'm not working off a master formula for this, I'm just showing you the technique. So I'm not going to bother putting any more cream in than this, any more of the aqueous cream base that I'm using. And as it stops being a paste, it starts flying around a lot more, so we need to be more careful about not going off the edge of the tile so we don't lose our product. Okay. There you go. So in just a minute or two I'll have all of that worked into a nice smooth and elegant aqueous cream with calamine lotion in it.